Ah, the 1970s, a time of disco balls, shag carpets, and radioactive heart implants. Welcome back to Retro USA Memories, where we don't just bring back the good old days, we also remind you how lucky we are to still be alive. Today, we're diving into 9 inventions from the 70s so wild, so shockingly dangerous, they were eventually banned for good. Buckle up. Or don't. It's the 70s. Seatbelts were optional anyway. 1. Radioactive pacemakers. In the 1970s, medical innovation was booming, and nothing said cutting edge quite like implanting a nuclear reactor inside your chest. These devices were powered by plutonium-238, a radioactive element also used in space probes and nuclear warheads. The logic batteries that could last 20-30 years without replacement. A dream for heart patients. But there was a small catch. If the pacemaker was damaged in an accident or during cremation, it could release radioactive material into the environment. Most people in the general public had no idea that these nuclear-powered pacemakers even existed. They were developed mostly through military contractors and elite medical programs, and while they were implanted in several hundred patients, they were never widely advertised. Medical professionals were divided. Some praised the long battery life, while others quietly whispered, "Wait, we're putting plutonium in people." The turning point came in the late 1970s and early 80s, as public concern about nuclear safety, especially after the 3 Mile Island incident in 1979, grew. Suddenly, having a ticking radioactive time bomb in Grandpa's chest didn't feel so reassuring. By the mid-1980s, production was halted, and today, they're not used anywhere outside of very specific aerospace projects. Fun fact, special retrieval teams were trained to safely remove pacemakers from deceased patients to avoid contamination during cremation. Yes, people had a literal nuclear end-of-life plan. 2. Radium dial watches. Glow-in-the-dark watches felt like pure magic in the early 20th century, and even into the 1970s. Some cheap, luminous models still used traces of radium paint. These watches had a dark history. In the 1920s and 30s, female factory workers, later known as the Radium girls, were told to lick their paintbrushes for precision as they painted glowing numbers. They were assured the paint was safe. It wasn't. Many developed horrific illnesses: jaw necrosis, anemia, and bone cancer. Lawsuits followed. But somehow, radium-based products lingered on shelves and wrists into the 70s, especially in cheap imports or older stock. By the 1970s, most Americans were vaguely aware that radiation equals bad, thanks to growing Cold War fears. But the average consumer didn't realize that their glow-in-the-dark watch might be radioactive. As technology improved, safer alternatives like tritium and phosphorescent paints replaced radium. The U.S. government officially banned consumer radium use in watches by the late 1970s, although leftover stock circulated into the early 80s. My take: time flies, especially when your wristwatch could double as a Geiger counter. Beautiful, deadly, and glowing with regret. 3. Theomide Pills. Thalidomide is perhaps one of the darkest pharmaceutical chapters in modern history, and by the 1970s, it was still haunting the world. Initially released in the late 1950s as a remedy for morning sickness and insomnia in pregnant women, thalidomide was hailed as a miracle drug, especially in Europe. But within a few years, horrifying consequences emerged: thousands of babies born with severe limb deformities, underdeveloped organs, and even missing eyes. FDA Inspector Francis Kelsey famously blocked its approval in 1960, citing insufficient safety data. That decision likely spared thousands of American families. However, by the early 1970s, thalidomide was still available in some countries, and leftover supplies existed globally, often through black market sales or experimental use. Reactions in the U.S. ranged from horror to cautious scientific curiosity. Some researchers investigated whether thalidomide could treat leprosy, AIDS, or multiple myeloma, which it eventually was approved for, under very tight restrictions, in the 1990s. By 1970, it was banned for general use in most Western countries, but the scars remained, both physical and emotional. My take. This is one of those stories where science failed the people, and then somehow came full circle. The drug was dangerous, but the bureaucracy that let it spread, even worse. 4. DDT, the pesticide that killed more than just bugs. In the 1970s, DDT wasn't just in your bug spray, it was practically part of the food chain. First introduced in the 1940s, DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, was hailed as a miracle pesticide. It wiped out mosquitoes, kept crops clean, and saved countless lives from malaria. But by the late 60s and early 70s, the miracle had turned monster. DDT didn't just kill pests, it stuck around. In soil, in water, in animals. It bioaccumulated, climbing the food chain, growing stronger with each step. And by the time it reached top predators like bald eagles, it was thinning eggshells and threatening entire species. Americans were slow to react at first. It wasn't until Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book Silent Spring 1962 that public awareness started to shift. By the 1970s, the environmental movement was gaining real traction. Activists, scientists, and even everyday families began pushing for a ban. The EPA banned DDT in the in 1972. It was a major win for conservation and a turning point in how we viewed the cost of chemical solutions. But let's be honest, some households still had old cans in their sheds for years afterward. Nothing screams Grandpa's garage like a rusty DDT can next to a mason jar of screws. My take: killing bugs is fine. Killing eagles, fish, and future generations, maybe not so much. 5. Shoe-fitting X-ray machines. Step right up and get irradiated. Remember going shoe shopping as a kid? If you grew up before the mid-1970s, you might have stuck your feet into a strange wooden box with a green screen and seen your bones. Welcome to the shoe-fitting fluoroscope, a device that blasted your feet with X-rays to show if your new shoes fit just right. Sounds fancy, right? Well, they were everywhere. In department stores, family shops, even local cobblers. Kids loved it. Parents trusted it. Salespeople thought it was cutting edge. What no one realized, these machines leaked radiation like a busted microwave, often directly at eye level for children. There were no proper safety regulations, and the machines weren't regularly calibrated. Some models emitted radiation doses 100 times what's considered safe today. By the 1950s, medical experts raised red flags. But it wasn't until the early 1970s that most states started banning them, some reluctantly, after lawsuits. Still, for many boomers, the memory is real, that little thrill of watching your toes wiggle on a screen while your DNA quietly protested. My take. We risked permanent cell damage to see if our sneakers were snug. And somehow, we're still here. 6. Mercury thermometers. Shake it, break it, poison your house. If you were sick in the 1970s, someone probably stuck a long glass stick under your tongue and told you, don't bite down. Why? Because that thermometer was filled with liquid mercury, a neurotoxin that, once spilled, could poison your whole kitchen. Mercury thermometers were everywhere, cheap, accurate, and totally normal until they broke, which, let's face it, happened often. When one shattered, silver droplets rolled across the floor like magic. Kids chased them. Adults ignored them. Ventilation hazmat suits. Please. We wiped it up with tissues and hoped for the best. The public's attitude was casual, at best. It wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s that concerns about mercury exposure and vapor toxicity became mainstream. Children, pregnant women, and infants were particularly at risk. Mercury can affect the nervous system, brain development, and motor skills. But hey, At least it looked cool while ruining your health. Most schools and hospitals began phasing them out in the 1980s. The U.S. formally banned sale of mercury thermometers for consumer use in 2001, but by then, the damage was done, and many homes still had one in a dusty drawer. My take: great for measuring fevers. Terrible if dropped. Even worse if your brother tried to play with it like a lava lamp. 7. Lead paint, bright colors, dull minds. In the 1970s, lead paint was everywhere, on walls, toys, furniture, cribs, and even lunchboxes. Why? Because it was cheap, vibrant, and long-lasting. That fire engine red or canary yellow you remember from your childhood bedroom? Yep, probably full of lead. For decades, nobody questioned it. Lead made paint dry faster, resist moisture, and keep colors bold. But under that glossy finish was a ticking time bomb, especially for kids. Children exposed to lead, often by chewing on painted surfaces or inhaling dust, faced severe developmental problems: decreased IQ, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, in extreme cases, even seizures or coma. In poor and inner-city communities, where old housing stock dominated, the crisis hit hardest. By the 1970s, scientists had mountains of data linking lead exposure to neurological damage. But industry groups pushed back hard, saying more research was needed. Classic playbook. Public awareness finally tipped in the mid-1970s thanks to activism, medical studies, and some very angry parents. The U.S. government officially banned lead-based paint for residential use in 1978, but by then, millions of homes were already coated in the stuff. My take: sure, the colors were beautiful, but so are crayons, and we don't lick walls full of those either. 8. Leaded gasoline, brain damage at every red light. There was a time when the smell of gasoline meant summer, freedom, and neurotoxins. In the 1970s, leaded gasoline was the norm. Tetraethyl lead was added to improve engine performance and reduce knocking. It worked. But every time you filled up or idled in traffic, you were releasing airborne lead into the environment. Lead particles settled in soil near highways, playgrounds, and schools. Kids played in it. People breathed it. And the consequences were brutal, especially for developing brains. Despite mounting evidence, oil companies fought regulation tooth and nail. They funded research saying lead was safe, blamed poor parenting for behavioral issues, and even discredited scientists. Still, by the mid-1970s, the truth became undeniable. The EPA began phasing out leaded gas in 1975, mandating catalytic converters in new cars. Complete bans took years. It wasn't until 1996 that leaded fuel was fully banned for on-road vehicles in the U.S. My take: we used to poison ourselves daily just to avoid engine knocking. Now we know better, and our kids' report cards thank us. And that's just part 1. Stay tuned for even more dangerously dumb inventions, including toys that doubled as weapons and hairdryers filled with asbestos. If you survived the 1970s without glowing, combusting, or coughing up lead dust, consider yourself lucky, and maybe a little radioactive.